Hi everyone, I'm Tom Pelletier. I'm on the Board of Directors of the Center for Environmental Education and Discovery, SEED, and this is Friday 15 at 2:15, our weekly nature talk. Usually these are done by Ranger Eric, but I'm filling in today, so thanks for joining me. Another thing that's a little bit different today is that most of our talks so far have, pretty much all of them have been about animals, but today we're going to talk about plants. And one of my favorite plants, which is the Eastern Hemlock. So anyway, I hope you will join us, stick around and join me here for a few minutes, and then join us every Friday at 2:15 for our Friday 15 at 2:15 Nature Talks. So thank you for joining me. So as I said, I wanted to talk about the Eastern Hemlock, and partly it's because the Eastern Hemlock is a tree that's under serious threat right now. And it's one of my favorite trees. It's a conifer, an evergreen conifer, and we don't have that many on Long Island anymore. I actually happen to be in central Massachusetts today, which is why I can show you a bunch of hemlocks. But we used to have them on Long Island, and New York State still has quite a few of them. In fact, it is the third most common tree in New York. And if you go north, you will see quite a few of them. The Adirondack Mountains Forest Preserve, the amazing park that all of us New Yorkers share, has quite a few Eastern Hemlocks, and they're just gorgeous trees. So I'm going to switch this camera to the front so I can show you a few things. So these are Eastern Hemlocks right here, and I just happen to have a spot here where there is also a white pine. And just to contrast, white pine is also another evergreen conifer, and it is also a very common tree. But I want to just show you a few things that help you distinguish between things like the white pine and Eastern Hemlock. So I'm going to come right over here to this one. This is a white pine, and you will see that it has sort of long needles. It's a very traditional, very common pine tree. They're also beautiful trees. If you look here, you will see that it has needles in clumps. And if you were to count the needles in every clump, you would find, unless one's been knocked off, that it's 5. And that's a characteristic of the eastern white pine. Some other pine trees might have 3 or 2. There are some others that have 5. So finding one that has 5 doesn't necessarily mean it's a white pine, but it definitely, if you find one that doesn't have 5, then it's definitely not a white pine. So that's what a little tiny sapling Eastern white pine looks like. And then right over here next to it, sort of growing into it, in fact, is an Eastern Hemlock. And you can see the Eastern Hemlock has those kind of small needles, like a Christmas tree almost. In fact, some people actually use them for Christmas trees. It has these little needles that are, an inch or less in length. And there are other trees that, of course, that have that kind of needles, like spruces and that sort of thing. But one of the ways you can tell it's a hemlock instead of a spruce is that the needles are very flat. So if you were to pull off some of these needles and try to roll them in your fingers, they won't roll because they're flat. But that's one of the tricks for identifying these sort of small needled conifers, is to try and roll it, because if you can roll it, it's probably a spruce or something along those lines, because they have a sort of either a square cross-section or even a round cross-section, and so they will roll, but a hemlock won't. Now there are other ones that also are flat, like firs, but one of the ways you can tell that it is a hemlock is if I can zoom way in here. You will see those tiny little green stems at the end of every needle where it attaches to the twig. You can also see there are little tiny bumps at where each leaf attaches. Those are characteristic of hemlocks. In fact, one of the ways that sort of memory devices for identifying hemlocks is that people say, hems have stems. So hemlocks have stems, whereas some of the other ones like firs don't have stems. So anyway, remember, hems have stems. They also tend to have these stripes on the underside of the needles. You can see those. And so the hemlocks, Eastern Hemlock, I'm going to walk over here a little bit, is a gorgeous tree. It's sort of, kind of classic pyramid shape, Christmas tree shaped. You can see one over there. These are growing right along the water. That's another thing about Eastern Hemlocks, which is interesting, is that they are very adaptable. These ones are growing with their roots right in the, soaking wet year-round, and they're perfectly happy. If I come over this way, you can see that they also, there are also more of them up there, up the hill, and they grow on the tops of mountains. So, they can tolerate a lot of different conditions. Over here, you can see a couple of saplings here that are growing underneath other trees and some fairly large, deciduous trees. But one of the interesting things about hemlocks is that they are very good at surviving in the shade for a long period of time. So some of them will live decades or even hundreds of years in the shade of other trees, and then when the other trees fall down finally, the hemlocks will start growing. And some of them have been identified by tree rings to be 500 or 600 years old. So it's a very long-lived tree. They can be 150 feet tall, or more possibly. We don't really have any more old growth ones, I don't think. But anyway, so however, the problem is that this introduced insect called the Hemlock Wooly Adelgid, which is native to Japan and other places in the Pacific Rim, it lives on hemlocks in Japan and doesn't cause a very big problem because the hemlocks there are adapted to it, and also because there are insect predators that keep it in check. Here in the United States, we don't have that. So when the Hemlock Wooly Adelgid showed up in Virginia in the 1950s, the Eastern Hemlocks had no defenses against it, and they were sort of succumbed to it, and a lot of them have died. An awful lot of hemlock trees have been lost in the east, which is really sad. And they've been marching steadily north. So one of the first places they were seen in New York was in Long Island. And that's one of the reasons why we don't have very many hemlocks left in Long Island. But what's really got me sort of bothered is one of my favorite places is the Adirondack Mountain Forest Preserve. And unfortunately, the Hemlock Wooly Adelgid has marched to the north to the point where it is right at the edge of the Adirondack Forest Preserve. So that's kind of sad. Now, there is some good news that they're trying to find ways to defeat it, but I actually was looking around this morning and I did find one little sapling here. So I can show this to you. You see, first of all, you will see that this sapling, you can tell one of the reasons I came and looked at this one is it's starting to turn yellow compared to a healthy one right over there. This one is definitely a much lighter color. And if I turn this over, no, I can't find them. Okay, so if I can zoom in close enough, you can see little white dots on the undersides of the hemlock needles, and you can see that they're sort of white and fluffy, sort of almost like wool, and that's why the adelgids are called woolly adelgids. They are fascinating creatures of their own. They have a life cycle where they basically sort of go dormant in the summer, and then in the fall they start let me back up a little bit. They attach themselves to a needle right at the base and basically sort of suck the sap of the hemlock tree. They start really doing that in earnest in October. They mostly lie sort of dormant in the summer. They start in October and they form that sort of woolly protection that keeps them from being eaten, probably also keeps them somewhat warm in the winter, and they develop over the winter. They lay eggs towards the end of the winter, which hatch in early spring, and then those adelgids start really sort of chomping or sucking juices, as it were, and then they lay eggs that do something really kind of interesting. Some of them attach into little what are called crawlers that crawl around on the branches and sort of disperse so that they can spread across the whole tree. But then some others, a proportion of them, actually develop wings and fly away. And those ones that fly away reproduce sexually. All the other ones that I was just talking about were reproducing sort of clones, asexual clones. But the ones that fly away reproduce sexually. But the weird thing is they will only reproduce on a specific kind of spruce that is found in the Far East. We don't have that spruce here. So when the woolly adelgids that we have here in the United States reproduce and form that flying stage, they end up dying because there just isn't any, that spruce that they need isn't here. So that's sort of a good thing for us because it slows down the spread of them, because the flying stage ends up being sort of lost. And so the only way they spread really is going from tree to tree. There's some evidence that they can get sort of carried by birds' feet. They get on birds' feet when birds are are looking for insects in the trees. So that's, and they've been spreading it about, they've been spreading north of about 2 miles a year in New York. And as I said, they're at the foothills of the Adirondacks now. So what they're trying to do to stop them is, there's a couple of things. One is that there are pesticides that work, but nobody really wants to spread pesticides all over the state to try and kill, to try and save the hemlocks. However, what they have found is a couple of insects that they have brought from the Far East and the northwest of the United States, which also has hemlocks, but that are resistant to the woolly adelgid. So anyway, there's a couple of beetles that they've tried, and a ladybug, and some parasitic flies. So they've tried these, and they seem to be working. It hasn't been a total success yet, but they seem to be working, and hopefully that's going to save at least some of the trees. They've also started to find trees that are naturally resistant, and they're developing, breeding those and developing those to hopefully replant hemlocks in parts of the Northeast where they've been lost. So that's the hopeful part of it. Those are called biological controls, and they have a sort of a mixed record in terms of biological controls. Sometimes that's gone very badly, of course, when they've introduced biological controls that just ended up being worse than the original problem. But they've gotten more sophisticated about that now, so they test them quite a bit to make sure that they're bringing in a predator that is very specific to whatever it is that they're trying to control. And these beetles and ladybugs and flies that they brought in are very specific to adelgids, woolly adelgids, the hemlock woolly adelgids. So hopefully they will sort of catch up and slow the adelgids down, and we can save, at least some of the eastern hemlocks that we have in New York. Here's a couple of little ones that might make nice Christmas trees for somebody. And then I also wanted to show you another interesting thing about hemlocks, which is that when they die, like this one here did, woodpeckers really go for them. So you can see this is a woodpecker, probably a pileated woodpecker, which we have around here. They're occasionally found on Long Island also, but anyway. All right, so that's my little bit about the eastern hemlock and the race to save them. from the introduced Wooly Adelgid. Thank you very much for sticking with me here and watching with me and joining us on our Friday 15 at 2:15. Ranger Eric will probably be back next week. I actually don't know what he's going to be talking about, but I'm sure it will be something interesting. So thank you for joining us, and be sure to like our Instagram and Facebook and follow us on our website or join our email list if you want to know about events coming up for SEED, the Center for Environmental Education and Discovery. And thank you very much. Bye-bye.